The anti-malaria drug mefloquine, known under the product name Lariam, has been widely used to prevent malaria infections since the 1990s. But its known side effects, which include anxiety and depression, are bringing scores of Irish former soldiers on a collision course with their government. John Webb has the story.
There are moments Tony Moore doesn't recognize himself, like the time he almost stabbed his wife.
I sat at this table and we were just like me and you, John, talking away, and it was like someone put a black bag over my head, that all I wanted to do was put a knife through my wife.
Still married, it's a dark compulsion he can't quite explain.
Why would I come up with a thought like that? It's unbelievable, you know, to think about. It's frightening.
A soldier at heart, he joined the Irish military in 1983, and his country's contribution to global peacekeeping took him to several countries in Africa. A decade later, he's a tram driver in the Irish capital, Dublin, by his own admission, a shadow of the person he once was. And that, he believes, is because of a tablet that was meant to keep him healthy. In 2013, the Irish subsidiary of healthcare company Roche updated the product information for one of its drugs. It included this section under the heading Special Warnings and Precautions for Use. Among 4 paragraphs of bold print, this sentence stood out. Cases of suicide, suicidal thoughts, and self-endangering behavior, such as attempted suicide, have been reported. If they develop, says the company, stop taking the drug immediately. It goes on to say in a list of undesirable effects that the frequency of suicide and suicidal thoughts is not known, but that other effects like anxiety and depression are common. The drug in question was the anti-malarial medication Lariam from the compound mefloquine. It was discontinued in Ireland just 3 years later. But as Moore knows all too well, it's been the Irish military's anti-malarial drug of choice since 2001, and still is.
2005, when I went to Liberia, the drug was Lariam and Lariam only, and the same with Chad. We had no choice but to take Lariam.
After his 6-month tour of duty in Liberia, Moore suffered from insomnia and muscle spasms. But it was on returning from Chad, he says, and another course of Lariam, that the darkness set in.
I had paranoia, I had suicide thoughts, I had depression, I had mood swings, I had anger, and it was like being caught in a circle and couldn't get out.
Some folks have told me it takes all of their effort to stop jumping off a building, or to stop jumping into a fire, or to stop putting a weapon to their head and shooting themselves. It's almost like something out of a horror movie.
Dr. Remington Levin is an epidemiologist. He's also a former American Army officer and a global authority on anti-malaria drugs. And he says in the case of mefloquine or Lariam, even what it's most effective at isn't necessarily fighting malaria.
When you look at drugs most associated with acts of violence, the top 10 drugs are all psychotropic drugs, amphetamines, antidepressants, and so on, with the exception of mefloquine, which is an anti-malarial. And so I think that's further evidence that mefloquine really should be thought of as primarily a psychotropic drug with incidental anti-malarial properties.
Not that malaria prevention isn't critical. In 2016 alone, it claimed more than 400,000 lives, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. Worryingly, some mosquitoes are showing signs of resistance to anti-malarial drugs. Mefloquine crosses from the blood into the brain's fatty tissue, predominantly acting on the areas responsible for fears and emotion. And both those things have come to define Moore's life.
And I came back from Chad, the psychological side effects kicked in. And it was then I went to a psychologist and I sat down and spoke with her, and she says to me, it's the hallmarks of the side effects of Lariam.
Moore's story echoed many others. So why, amid such controversy, would a country's military insist on using Lariam? And what, if anything, was the Irish government doing about it? it didn't take much digging to reveal the answer to the second question.
Fundamentally, it is a medical matter that should be decided by qualified medical professionals and not politicians.
In a debate in the country's parliament last year, Junior Minister for Defence Paul Keogh made the case for Lariam.
The medical procedures involved in assessing personnel before deployment are designed to ensure that a person who may be vulnerable to depression or other mental health issues is not prescribed Lariam.
Tony Moore was one of those people, but he was given Lariam anyway.
I had anxiety and depression thrown up in my medical file. It was the army that put it there, and yet they still went along and gave me the drug on 2 occasions. Yet they tell the world, oh, we look after our troops great.
Moore moved to the front line of the battle for answers, becoming a vocal critic of the military's policy, including on social media. Moore's activism didn't go unnoticed. It made him enemies in the military establishment, but it also won him some friends. One of those, a civilian who years before returned from honeymoon, a changed man.
I felt shivery, I felt cold, I felt unsteady, I felt, my balance was affected. What I wasn't able to describe at that point in time was that I was actually suffering from anxiety, from depression, from other neuropsychiatric problems. I didn't have the language to identify them.
Andrew Bryce and his wife were given Lariam before honeymooning in Kenya in 1996. She suffered no side effects, but his health quickly deteriorated.
I was always traveling on business, working 68-hour weeks, no problem. And suddenly I couldn't walk outside my front door. For the first 2 years of marriage, if I made it down the stairs during the day, my wife had to carry me back upstairs in the evening. That's how bad I was.
Unable to return to work, Bryce lent support to Moore and other soldiers in their quest for answers.
The British Army, the French, the Australians, a number of other major armies have all either banned Lariam or made a drug of last resort. The Irish Army insists on using Lariam as drug of choice. It beggars belief. I can't see any logic for it.
Yeah. Bryce says ignorance of the side effects isn't an explanation. Yeah.
I can't understand how they could possibly not know. Like, anybody who does any research whatsoever on Lariam knows that it's a dangerous drug. The FDA, the European medicines agencies have both released severe safety updates about the fact that Lariam causes permanent side effects, that it may lead to suicide.
An investigation by the Irish national broadcaster and verified independently found that between 2000 and 2012, the suicide rate amongst Irish soldiers who'd taken Lariam was around 3 times higher than those who hadn't. But the Irish Department of Defence has consistently disputed this, saying in 2013 that an investigation had found it extremely unlikely that Lariam had played a part in the suicides of several soldiers. It also maintains that Lariam is the most effective drug for particular strains of malaria, and because it's taken weekly, is ideal for military conditions. With little common ground between Lariam's critics and the Irish military establishment, scores of soldiers, including Moore, are taking legal action against the state.
To date, about 350 soldiers are in regular contact with my firm. At this moment, we're currently gathering, records and information and conducting meetings with this 350. But of that 350, we have instructions to issue proceedings on 100.
The outcome could reverberate across the globe, including here in South Africa, because fundamentally at stake is the principle underlying all medicine: first, do no harm. And that, says lawyer Norman Spicer, could shift the focus from the state to the doctors.
You cannot compromise your duty to your patient. So I think, the doctors in the medical corps need to be aware of that they may possibly have to answer for any administrations of the drug that they give out where it shouldn't have been done.
But as the wheels of justice slowly turn, the mental battle, says Moore, grinds on.
And you don't know how to separate it, and it just buzzes away, and then the anger comes out, and you either want to lock yourself away from everyone because they don't understand what you're going through.
It's partly this disappointment. It's partly this sense among veterans that they've been let down by their leadership that is contributing to the epidemic of suicide that we see. Veterans are so despondent at having been abandoned by their leaders that in many cases they simply feel there's no alternative but suicide.
The Irish Department of Defence declined to be interviewed for this story because the matter is before the courts. Rosh Island didn't respond to our interview request. Here in South Africa, as elsewhere, Lariam is being phased out for commercial reasons.